So I can begin. Okay, well, first just giving my name as Minister Eliel, former name Dennis Young, that I was born and raised in the city of Detroit, Michigan, in an area that was known as, in Detroit, the Black Bottom. And the Black Bottom in Detroit, it was an area that was basically consisting of African Americans. And my understanding that when blacks first began to migrate to Detroit during the production of the automobile, primarily started by Ford family that came about with the assembly line, and which required a lot of workers, unskilled workers, and of course a lot of African Americans came to Detroit from the South. I remember our life coming up in the Lower East Side of Detroit, as it's known as the Black Bottom, that up to the age of about 10, my life was happy. We had plenty to eat, what have you. But then in the late 50s, they had in Detroit a recession. And of course, was a Great Depression. My father, he was dismissed from his job, he was laid off, and I certainly saw us go from what I considered a full meal, happy time, to a meal that consisted a lot of Campbell tomato soup or any other cheap food that my parents were able to obtain. And my father, of course, as I stated, he was already what you would consider a senior when he was laid off, and not at the age to attain unemployment, but older than a lot of the other African Americans that had been laid off from the same job. And consequently, he never was recalled to the job. And we had to eventually go and seek assistance in Detroit. It was known as welfare. And my father, being a very proud man, for a very long season, he resisted taking any assistance. He would take myself and my brothers, and we would go, and he had brought a little pickup truck, and we would go junking. We would go through the alleys and pick up paper and newspapers and copper, and he would sell it. He did this as long as he could. I can imagine that it wasn't a great income, but certainly it could not suffice, and eventually we had to come to that point. I remember very clearly an incident I really want to talk about, it when we had to accept the assistance that they had the social worker that would come to the house, and they had to interview the entire family. And I remember we had to had the little radio we had a little small black and white television, had to put everything out of sight. And we were sitting in the living room, and my mother and father was there, and all my sisters and brothers. And the social worker, he was asking the questions around the room. He asked my mother the size of our clothing, what have you, and asked her personal information, where she comes from, her parents' name, what have you. And he come to my father, and he had to ask my father the very same question. Now, that's it. I never knew anything of the background of my father. Neither did my mother or any of my sisters or brothers. And it was like a great revelation. I mean, we're about to find out who this guy really is, you know. And everyone's sitting up on the edge of their seat waiting to hear this history about this man we called Daddy that we didn't know anything about. And it was really something, because when my father answered, he told him, "My name is Charles Anderson Young." He said, "That's all you need to know. You can write that down." And the social worker, he was like kind of indignant. He said, "Mr. Young, we need this information, this, that, and does. You know, you're required by law to give it." My father told him again, "My name is Charles Anderson Young. You can write that down." And the social worker eventually said, "Well, you know, we really don't have to honor your request to give you public assistance and this, that, and that, you know." And my father told me, he said, "You know, you're certainly right." He said, "First thing, it's not your business where I come from, my parents, and this, that, and that." He said, "It's not your business to have underclothes that my children wear." And my father stood up, and it was really getting kind of loud. And the guy, he began to put his bags together, you know, because he understood that he needed to leave. And of course, my mother, she had gotten a little excited, and she was telling my father, "Oh, you stop, you're running them away." And my father had a way that he had a look. I mean, that certainly worked on the children, and it worked, because we knew it worked on our mother, you know. That my father would look, give a certain look, and she knew it was time for her to leave it alone, that he was in charge. And for a very long season, we did not receive the assistance. But as time went on, we had to eventually accept that. And I never will forget that it was a period in time that seemed like that was a great letdown for my father, spiritually so, that he began to just go down to the Detroit River and go fishing, what have you. But as I grew older, I certainly knew that it was a great letdown for him. So I eventually, just like any other blacks in America, grew up in a manner that roamed around with those of my peers in the neighborhood. Of course, it was a very, very close kind of an atmosphere between the neighbors and what have you. You know, everyone knew one another. You know, you could go in and out of one another's houses almost freely. It was a lot of the family type atmosphere that existed amongst neighbors. Now this, and again I have to make this clear, is that this was primarily on the Lower East Side, that as African Americans began to go up the ladder economically, it was the goal to move away from that area. So rumored wise, by word, it was like the Black Bottom is the worst place to be. You know, if my sisters, they always had a problem whenever they would meet someone. If they had to tell them that they lived in the Black Bottom, it was almost a guarantee that that was the last time they would see this person. But in reality, the bottom was very much family orientated. And there were no Europeans that lived in the neighborhood, but definitely all of the local businesses, the stores and what have you, were owned by Europeans. And I like to speak about the one, they had local grocery stores, you know. Of course, they had larger supermarkets, not many, but primarily in the black neighborhoods, you would find that African Americans, they would shop at the local grocery stores. At that time, at my young age, they were primarily owned by Italians. And I actually worked at one location, it was about 2 blocks away from where I stayed, called Du Bois Supermarket. And of course, it was patronized very strongly by those in the neighborhood. And the reason being is that primarily they would have to work on credit, that people in the neighborhood, they would get food, groceries, what have you, and it would be marked down until they received their welfare check or what have you. And believe me, it was a very lucrative kind of business for the Italians in the neighborhood. I worked as a little stock handler from an early age there, and they taught me a lot of things that my parents had no intentions on me ever having an understanding about. And they, at this particular store called DuBois Supermarket, it was owned by three brothers, Jimmy, Frank, and Joe. And they had three stores that was basically close in the area. And I enjoyed going to one another stores, you know, working, a small guy, you know. And out of the three brothers, the one brother, Frank, is real, I mean, had a real strong heart, real good person. His brother Jimmy, he was a criminal. And I can't think of a better word, you know. He was certainly a real immoral type individual. Exploited the sisters in the neighborhood, you know, for a half a pound of bologna or a half a loaf of Wonder Bread or some junk, you know, and did this on a regular basis. And there was one sister in the neighborhood by the name of Pat, dark skin, I mean, but beautiful, you know. I remember that earlier, I was in love with Pat. And Pat would come into the store, and when she would come in, if myself and Jimmy, she would come primarily during the afternoon when times were slow. She would come in, and Jimmy here lock the door, you know, and tell me, then he dust the shells off, you know. And him and Pat, they'll go down to the basement, you know, and they come up, and they come back up, he'll give her little meat, you know, and junk, you know. And when Pat would leave out, of course, the corners would always be a lot of individuals, a lot of older black men on the corner. And when she would exit the store, you know, of course, they would be shooting, you in there, that's, you know. And I'm a small guy, I didn't really know a lot, you know, but I knew that they was like, you know, they knew what was taking place. And I remember one time when I was actually filling the soda refrigerator with, you know, the different soda pops, what have you. And Jimmy and one of the other Italians named Joe, not his brother, this was another one, they were talking, and I heard the word for the very first time, blowjob. Now, the first time I ever heard it, you know, and when they said it, you know, I knew they were talking about Pat, you know, and so on and so forth, and they would laugh and that. And when he said the word, you know, I just like, blowjob, you know, and they both turned their attention to me, and Jimmy said, Denny, you know what a blowjob is? I said, what's a blowjob? And they just laughed. Oh, we got to get you fixed up. You know, we really got to take care of you. It went on, you know, but they never would tell me. And there was a older African American that actually worked behind the butcher counter, you know, and he had a problem about drinking, you know, and I knew they paid him minimum kind of wages, but Junior, but his real name was Elijah Butler, and but everyone called him Junior, you know. And I remember I went to Junior. I said, "Hey, Junior, what's a blowjob?" And he said, blew him up. He said, where you hear that word, you know? And I explained to him, I heard Jimmy and Joe talking. And I'll never forget, you know, he took me outside and we went around on the side of the store, and we sat down on these steps. And he told me, he said, you see, he said, and he explained to me what it was, you know. He said, now, when you see Pat come into the store and they go downstairs, and he explained that, you know. He said, and when she leaves, and you see all of the MFs up here, they don't care about her, they don't care about themselves, nothing. He said, so as soon as you able to, he said, you get as far away from here, and don't you ever come back here. And I was 10 years old at the time, you know, but story that I never forgot. And of course, as I grew older, you know, I understood it a lot better. But as far as having a understanding about any other kind of a life outside of that area that I lived in, it was only on the television. When I see I Love Lucy, or, you know, one of the shows, you know, that I had no idea. You know, one time I was taken out to Jimmy's house. He lived in the area called Roseville. And it was like so beautiful. I mean, the lawns was cut, manicured, houses nice. It was a great difference from in my neighborhood. You know, we didn't have grass, you know, and everything. I mean, we were required to like sweep the dirt or whatever, but there's nothing like the area of where Jimmy lived, you know. And I was like, man, that's nice, you know. And I remember one time when his daughter, every now and then, he would bring his little daughter to the store, you know, and she'd be running around like a little white girl, you know. And I remember one day that she saw a roach, and she said, Daddy, look at this ugly bug. And it like struck me. I said, man, she sure is dumb. She don't even know a roach when she see it, you know. But of course, I can imagine now that they didn't have roaches like we had in our neighborhoods, you know. See, in our neighborhood, the Italians, they ran the vice. I'm talking about they had control. They were the ones that controlled the numbers. I know everyone may not know about the numbers, call it policy in Chicago, you know, and that was a big thing in the black neighborhood, you know. I mean, a real big thing. You know, the government took it over and they call it the lottery, you know. But that's all it was the numbers, you know. But they would arrest us. They would arrest our people. You couldn't be seen running no numbers. But I'm telling you, it was a real big thing because it was the only thing black people always wanted to have something to hope for. And the numbers provided that. I mean, for a penny, and you could win like $5. You know, right? You know, a dime, you win $50. You know, so I mean, they went for it. In Detroit, they had a police unit at the time in Detroit called the Big Four. And the Big Four, it was 4 policemen riding in a great big black Chrysler. They didn't arrest nobody because there was no room in the car to put anybody. You know, really. The driver, he was a uniformed police, and the other 3 were plainclothesmen. They had a shotgun that fit right between the driver and the passenger, you know, right. And I'm telling you, you could be standing, it could be 500 black people standing around, and then somebody just hollers, here comes the foe. Man, you see them scattered. I mean, you got out of sight. And if you didn't, believe me, you would get your head busted. Because that was the purpose, the fear. You weren't supposed to just stand there. It wasn't like written that you're supposed to run, but hey, you stick around if you want to.